Hey, Gelly here. So in the many hours that I spent trying to glitch hunt for this game, speedrun, so on and so forth, there's a lot of little oddities that I've never actually truly documented, either for intentional or unintentional reasons. I regarded a lot of this stuff as not useful. However, a couple of things have cropped up to make me reconsider on that. First of all, Red Sound Skip Revamped made me rethink the fact that old skips couldn't be used in a new way. So I've been trying to go through a lot of my old information, trying to see if there's any new skips that are available. For the time being, there hasn't been, but I realize now that being able to have everything that I've known about in some sort of format would be very useful. The other thing is that after AGDQ 2020, it's most likely that I'll be taking a very long break. I wouldn't say retirement because retirement's for pussies, but a pretty long break in regards to playing this game again, considering I have very little competition, and my 1259 for all pages is probably one of my greater achievements, so it'll be hard to beat. So I don't want to ever lose the information on the smaller things that I have in my headspace at the moment, whether I die or I forget or what have you. So I'm going to try to record everything that I remember in terms of the very small things that aren't obvious. So I'm going to split this into, I guess, 6 sections, the first one being Myst Island, and then moving on to the various other ages, and hopefully documenting all the small stuff that never really made it into runs, or if it did, stuff that I never really properly explained. So the format of everything is that I'm having a bunch of very tiny clips that I basically talk and then I cut it off at the very end, so it might be a bit jarring. But this is mostly for, archival or purposes of information, not to necessarily be super clean, edited, or entertaining in any way. But if you find entertainment in it, that's pretty cool. So hopefully you enjoy, and hopefully there will be 5 more videos following this one. There are multiple hotspots or click positions on a screen that can go to the same place, yet have different camera movements adjusted for it. For example, these two go to the same position, but have wildly different camera movements. Another example just happens to be way down here over by the powerhouse. For whatever reason, if you just click inside of the door, you just take a simple left turn. If you click on the edge of the door, it makes a very obnoxious and weird movement. There are many instances of door jams having the ability to be able to be clipped into. For example, the edge of this cabin here has a very pronounced example. This seems to be because the edges of doors have holes in the collision that allow you to go through because they weren't sewn together perfectly. However, in many instances this is useless, even though in this example you could theoretically grab something through here. The safe actually needs to be opened in order to load the room inside of it. The invisible wall near the dock appears to be one way, where you can go down it but not back up. This is not an effect of the rocks. There is a physical invisible wall that you can actually walk on top of. Most notably, there is a small dip here. This invisible wall disappears if you click on this door. I have an earlier video describing how you can sink into this gear without opening it by strafing into it and sprinting at the right angle. However, something I never discussed is the ability to climb these gears. By using the very sloped geometry here and a bit of strafe running, you can actually climb up to the very top of this gear and onto this gear. A very interesting side effect of this is that this gear in particular should be gated from being able to switch you back into Classic, however it isn't. You can abuse this fact, if you're pretty careful, to go to, for example, over here, although this is far slower than actually just walking over. As I've noted before, the positions in the breaker area are sort of wonky. Here I'm demonstrating how you can use that to get out of bounds. However, less useful but perhaps more interesting is the fact that you can use this to get up to the top of this breaker pillar here. The corner here, very similarly like sort of Skyrim mountain climbing or really any other game with wonky physics. The slope here, by going back and forth and zigzagging up, lets you go up. You can pull the breaker here, and you can actually land on the invisible wall here, but that serves no purpose because you can just clip out of bounds by using the original anyway. However, it is interesting to be able to be that high up in Myst Island, especially when all other intended areas of the game that have you that high up usually have OSHA compliance level invisible walls protecting you from doing anything fun like falling down. When I had first discovered this out of bounds in particular, I had thought I had stumbled onto something that could be potentially powerful, although it was sort of contestable. Unlocking the clock tower bridge over here is a pain in the process in terms of compared to other Myst games, because each turn takes a very long time. Even though you can overlap them, it still takes a while. I had considered actually just clipping out of bounds instead, and since you can switch to classic from here, you can actually enter this without having ever unlocked the bridge. However, timing never really panned out, so it wasn't as powerful as I thought it would be. The library isn't often explored from a glitch hunting perspective because any glitches that are found in this area are rarely, if ever, usable for anything because the library isn't ever explored. However, there are a couple small things of note. For example, there are holes in the textures up here that lead up to the sky. This can be explained by the fact that I've been able to leave the actual mountain while the library has been enabled, and you can actually see that when you enter the library, everything else is unloaded. Another interesting thing of note is that this elevator, unlike every other Myst game in the series, does not turn midway through. Instead of doing so, they just rise all the way to the top, and I guess let you have your mind fill in this black part as turning around. This really is true robbery, but it sort of makes sense that they weren't able to program an elevator that could turn midway up. The ladders are sort of interesting. You could tell that the FOV was sort of shifted there, but it's not really explained why. And normally you aren't supposed to be able to fall off ladders or really anything like that in this game, but this is the one instance in the game where you can. Both ladders you can simply fall off of in order to demonstrate the collision, or the gravity rather. Not on this side though, and I really do not understand why the ability to fall off of this ladder is restricted just to this section over here. You can send the ship back up and down by making the solution to the stone ship puzzle incorrect. However, in some very odd instances, like you saw there, you can actually send the ship down or up instantly. When in Classic, changing your node can cause very small or almost undetectable effects. However, this causes interesting results when zooming into certain puzzles. For example, this is the intended way to look at this panel. However, if you hit F7, it looks like nothing has changed. However, the camera actually looks up instead. This is probably due to the slightly flawed zoom in function that it uses. More humorous is the effect that it has on the piano. Normally you just look down at the piano in a very odd but vertical way. However, hitting F7 lets you sit on top of it. Using an F7 node jump to clip out of bounds lets you actually see the general ship show that the collision is in terms of the stone ship being down. For example, you can hop onto the ship, and then if you're careful, hop back off, although it is far easier to use this slope, which is very convenient. But this does not apply to other areas, for example this downslope here, which lets you partially clip into the ship if you're careful, or if you're not careful, get stuck. Interestingly, there is a lot of what would be collision clipped into the ground. Very, very interesting. And a whole boatload of other interesting things being able to clip to the dock, so on and so forth. The one thing of perhaps interesting note, this white page switch box over here happens to have the white page unloaded until the fulfillments are fulfilled. So unfortunately there is actually no use to this other than falling out of bounds with style. In normal practice, the game should never have to reload an autosave. There are almost no instances where it should be required except for one, which is clipping out of bounds, like I will demonstrate here. The only other instance is loading into the game, which instantly takes you to the last known autosave. So for example, this is the autosave that exists here. However, for whatever reason, they have actually allowed us to have autosaves. By hitting F5, you can actually dictate which autosave position that you pick, rather than just picking within the last X minutes or whatever. And therefore, by being able to clip out of bounds, which I might have munted up here. Nope, we're good. By falling out of bounds, it will reload that lost autosave, which is now in the position that I dictated here. However, this happens to not be useful because autosaves are only loaded on game start or when you've done something wrong. Something I encounter often when doing tree clip, but have never had the chance to be able to properly document, is the fact that if you're a little overzealous with clipping into the tree, you can fall out of bounds and not actually load in the room below. I will do that very quickly here. By falling to the other edge of the tree, you actually fall through and unload the room below, causing this weird matte surface to appear. Although the music is still playing, and there is a light bulb, shockingly enough, there is no book. Interestingly, in older versions of the game, before more recent patches, this ring around the tree here actually had foot collision, and so you could stand on it. This means that what I'm doing right here isn't really possible in older patches, although I believe I had it happen once. It was through other odd and unintended meanings. So this is an interesting way to, for example, get pictures like this, or, you know, have a light bulb. Light bulbs are cool. In older versions of Myst, you could actually close this safe by just clicking on it anywhere. However, this just brings you out of the safe when you're in free roam, and if you're in classic, it just doesn't do anything, as I will demonstrate here. It doesn't close it. However, you can close it by pulling the lever and waiting a little bit. By hearing that noise, you can actually open the safe again. Otherwise, it just doesn't do anything. Perhaps more interesting is the fact that you can press some of the buttons while the safe is open. If one is extraordinarily careful with how they handle going onto the tree, they can go on top of the barrier around the edge. Interestingly, you can now go into the back of the tree and go up the back of it as well. Because tree clip only applies to the front of the tree, you can go a lot higher than you would at the front of the tree, mostly because the front of the tree attempts to prevent you from being able to go any higher through methods like this for whatever reason. But most interestingly, this has a Easter egg on the back of it. In my talkings with Twitch Eagleheart, we couldn't actually find any intended ways to do this, so this is most notably the only not cheat engine way to see this Easter egg. Oh, and a minor thing, you can actually go on top of the cabin from here. Sort of cool. Although, once again, nothing super interesting going on here. In the old version of rmme, it was a lot more powerful to be out of bounds in this area. For example, you could hop on top of this library to take some very beautiful and unexplainable pictures, or you could ride along the edge of the library here in order to enter the fireplace early without even turning the fireplace or setting the code. However, they have changed the collision or the gravity or something about the physics to where neither of these things are possible anymore. However, sort of interestingly, when going into the rocket ship for Selenitic, if you ride along the edge here around the invisible walls, and are very, very careful about it, you can actually encounter a very odd floor in the game over here. There's an entire massive flat plane of floor preventing you from falling down here. Normally this would be interesting, and you can actually clip into the ship over here. However, the interior of the ship isn't loaded until it's 59 volts and opened. Otherwise, Unity considers the room unloaded.